my company helps people start their construction projects. And I was talking to one of the fire victims a couple of months ago, and she was saying, you know, people just keep building the same way they've built before. And it kind of stopped me in my tracks because this is not how we should be doing it.
And I didn't know much about fire until the 2003 Cedar Fire, which burned right through our community. And there were so many misconceptions on the radio and in the newspapers and pretty much everywhere you look that I just felt it was important to try to get the information out, being the teacher that I was. So essentially, we've created a fire-prone environment into a sort of a catastrophic environment that allows fires to burn everywhere all the time. And we have to learn how to adapt to us as well as the environment itself. So the best way to do that is from the house out. And that's sort of a keystone phrase that we're going to talk about more later. But these are the three main concepts that I want to address. And here's a map that's showing you the fire starts in the Cleveland National Forest in Southern California. And you look at that line there that kind of goes through, that's Interstate 8. That's where most of the fires start in California, is along roadsides or where they're doing things like welding, or they're spilled over barbecue. So we're causing these fires in our environments, and they're spreading into wildlands rather than the other way around. So the moral of the story here is fires are more destructive today because of exponential human population growth and placing homes where they ought not to be. Because actually, when you clear a lot of landscape, you're creating environments where embers actually target the home like a bowling alley. And so you don't want to do that. And interestingly enough, what we found in research is that homes actually burn more when they're next to grass than they are when they're next to shrubs, which is not what you often hear. And here are the greatest risk factors for homes in terms of burning down. Low to intermediate housing density. So in other words, you have a lot of scattered homes. That's a pretty high risk factor. Homes older than 30 years, and they have a bunch of features that are not particularly fire safe. Vegetation immediately around the home, overhanging or touching. And that means if you have a tree dropping pine needles on the roof, you've got problems. Not the pine needle, not the pine tree itself, not the oak tree, but dropping stuff in the gutters around the home. So the answer is not to cut down the trees. The answer is to trim them so they don't overhang the home, and keep them there because they will stop embers from landing on the home in areas that you have not been able to maintain properly. So how do you keep the embers from igniting your home? That's the key feature. That's the primary. You want to start from the house outward. Number one, you want to put innocent vents on your roof. They're very cheap. You can do it for a couple $100. What they do, they have fine screens, and they prevent the embers from getting inside of the attic. Sprinklers, which we'll talk about more in a second. The Australians, the Canadians, they all understand this, that wet homes do not burn. And one of the key features in preventing home loss in those areas is exterior sprinklers. What do? We put sprinklers on the inside. Why? Because we've got this paradigm that's been based on the past of urban fires and skyscrapers, where you want to save people. Well, okay, the fire coming from inside homes anymore, typically, ones that are causing all the problems, they're coming from the outside. So where should you put the sprinklers? On the outside. And it's probably the easiest to do, and it's relatively inexpensive. You can do the simplest version for less than $1,000. If you want your own water tank, you're talking maybe $6,000, $7,000. When you're talking about $1 million home or a $500,000 home, or maybe potentially your life, that's not much of an expense. The Woolsey fire in Malibu that happened recently, they had an entire day from where the fire started to when it hit Malibu and burned all those homes. Day. So the homeowners could have hit the button before they evacuated and wet down their homes prior to the fire embers showing up, and their homes would have stayed unburned. So this is a very important strategy that I really encourage you to consider. So just the main points here really briefly. You've got Class A roofing. You got to make sure that the roofing is not flammable. You've got ember-resistant vents. You got closed eaves. You've got rooftop and under sprinklers. Safe landscaping. So instead of thinking of fire as a catastrophic, uncontrollable event that's going to devastate you, your home, and your neighborhoods, think of it like the rain. It's going to happen. What do? Well, with the rain, you put gutters up. You make sure your slopes are away from your house so the rain doesn't get under your house or in your basement. Same thing with fire. Fire is going to show up. There's nothing we can do. So large, high-intensity wildfires are inevitable. We've got to get that in our mind and stop trying to manipulate nature to prevent them. But the catastrophic losses of our communities during such fires are not inevitable. So we can do something about this, but we have to focus on our community itself. Second thing is you reduce fire risk from the house out. Focus on the home and figure out how to make that not flammable. And finally, we want to plan for the future, from the future. So a lot of us, at least agency-wise, we're thinking about the last 100 years with the climate change situation, and I'm going to jump into that really quickly here. It's going to be a whole different environment, and we've got to plan for that. We can't plan for what used to be because that doesn't count anymore.
I mean, where does this idea of having the house wet from the outside come from? Has it been tried before? Has it been used somewhere?
They do it in Canada. They do it in Australia. In fact, up until recently, and there's never been any companies in America that have done these things, but some Australian companies have now shown up here. And there's a company in Canada that you can order this little set, it's called a wildfire protection kit. It comes in a box like this. It's got 2 sprinklers. If you have a 1,000-foot square home, they're really easy to install. You put them on both ends of your house, and they're connected to your water system. And within 30 minutes, your house is wet. And not just the house, but the surrounding environment. Because when you have a hydrated environment, not only will the house not ignite, but nothing around it will. In fact, the fire agencies in Canada use these in front of the fire fronts to moisten the forest, and the fire stops dead in its tracks.